22 minutes past 7. Now, the Prime Minister says New Zealand is not immune to an act of terrorism. While pushing his GCSB legislation through Parliament, Mr Key has confirmed authorities are monitoring New Zealanders with connections to al-Qaeda. He says he's signed off warrants to observe people who have left New Zealand for training camps in Yemen.
People have trained in New Zealand and gone off to those camps, and that's just the way things are. I mean, we live in a global environment where there are real threats, and that's the point we make with the GCSB legislation.
So this comes as the GCSB bill has just passed its second reading in Parliament by 61 votes to 59. For more on this, Robert Patman, Professor of International Relations at the University of Otago. Good morning, Robert. So what do you think of the Prime Minister's comments yesterday?
Yes, interesting timing. I think it's no surprise the possibility that New Zealand citizens might have connections with al-Qaeda, because this is a pattern that we've seen in many countries which are close to New Zealand. American citizens have had links with al-Qaeda, British citizens, Australian citizens. So we can't be surprised that there's a few isolated remnants within New Zealand society that has those sort of political sympathies.
But didn't the previous legislation give the people in charge the power to observe those possible or alleged terrorists or those people with connections to al-Qaeda anyway?
Well, that certainly is the claim and the concern, I suppose. You know, this situation has existed for some time, so why did the Prime Minister imply there was a new freshness about this threat? Maybe he knows something that we don't. Of course, there's been a great deal of concern, Peter, since the incidents in Boston, the Boston bombings and also the attacks in Woolwich. There's concern about radicalised homegrown terrorists. But, you know, if that is the case, if there's a new fear of terrorists evolving within New Zealand who are inspired from afar by al-Qaeda or Yemen, for example, then it seems strange to actually extend the powers of the GCSB, because that wouldn't necessarily deal with the problem. Because one of the dangers here, and this is a strategic concern, is that New Zealand and a number of other countries are engaged in a political struggle with al-Qaeda, and actually extending the powers of the state won't necessarily diminish the threat within New Zealand. It might even boost it. In other words, you need to politically discredit the ideas of terrorism, and actually clamping down, making the government more intrusive on people's lives, particularly law-abiding citizens, doesn't necessarily diminish the political appeal of al-Qaeda.
Yes, it's quite intriguing that this happens after what happened in a taxi in Invercargill late last week. Here was a local citizen abusing a Muslim, somebody who obviously has no connection with al-Qaeda. But because we have an increasing Muslim community in this country, you would think that we want to have inclusiveness as opposed to trying to shut down ideas of terrorism.
It is a very delicate balance, I think, that we have to maintain. Ultimately, the robustness of a democracy is the best deterrent to the extreme ideas of those terrorists who are dedicated to destroying it. And what you mustn't do, and I think this was the lesson of the Bush period in the United States, which Mr Obama has learnt from, what you mustn't do is create a police state, or at least extend the powers of the state in a draconian fashion, which is disproportionate to the actual threat. Mr Key has conceded that the number of people who may be influenced by al-Qaeda in New Zealand is very small. And therefore, the big question is, why are we seeing a substantive expansion of the powers of the Government Communications Security Bureau, if that is the case?
All right, Robert Patman from Otago University. Thank you very much for those thoughts this morning.